Welcome to the Deep Bass Podcast, where we take a hard look at the element that makes or breaks games, the music. I'm Peter Thomas, and I'm joined by my co-host, Cody Haltom, and we are happy to have you along with us on our journey through Fable. That's it. It's just Fable. It's like expecting there to be a subtitle. What's going on, Cody?
Chicken chaser.
Does that mean you chase chickens?
Yes, it does. Which I never understood because I don't think there's a single point in this game where you chase chickens as like a quest.
No, you can just kick them. And that's about it.
Yeah. I can't believe that we're finally covering Xbox.
I know. Our titles have been leaning heavily towards Nintendo with a touch of Sony in there, but first Xbox title, Xbox exclusive, right? There's no cross-platform play on this, right?
No, unless it's on, like if you count like PC.
Yeah, right. A little PC. But the second one was purely Xbox. And I think the third did have a PC release as well, but it was so limited. I remember looking it up and it was super expensive. But yeah, Fable is here, man. We're doing Fable.
This is a really interesting one because this one, yes, we're in the month of October officially. Unlike everyone who was putting Halloween decorations up in September. I judge you people, by the way. But no, this is a really kind of spooky soundtrack. Did we do this like on purpose, putting this in November, or did we just kind of happen about it in some way?
No, it just kind of sort of happened. And I agree. This definitely gives me very strong fall vibes when I listen to it. I know that it came out in September, which I'm going to cover here in a second, but I don't know if that was intentional or not when it released too, because you're right. It feels very autumny when you listen to it.
Yeah, even when you play it, because I went back and my Xbox actually worked and let me play the game for a bit, and it just seems like a very autumn game.
Right. It was purely coincidental. The next episode we do, I definitely planned a little bit more to coincide with the season, so to speak. But yeah, this one just kind of fell that way and worked out really nicely.
Yeah, well, no matter what, I'm glad it did because this one was so much fun to cover.
Yes, it was. So let me get started here. We're going to go into some of the game history. Originally developed under the working title of Project Ego, Fable is an action role-playing game developed for Microsoft's Xbox, Windows, and Mac OS X platforms by Big Blue Box Studios. This may sound strange because we all mostly remember Lionhead Studios being the developers, but Big Blue Box Studios was actually a satellite company of Lionhead. The first release was seen in September of 2004, and an extended version of the game, Fable: The Lost Chapters, was released for Xbox and Windows in September of 2005. A port of this game eventually made it to the Mac OS X in March 2008 due to licensing issues. An HD remaster of the game named Fable Anniversary was released just shy of its 10th anniversary on Windows and the Xbox 360 in February of 2014. The game's soundtrack was composed by Russell Shaw, and the opening title theme was written by Danny Elfman. And I believe Danny actually had some hand in some of the other compositions as well, though he is not credited as heavily, at least according to the sources that I pulled this from. Fable was the top-selling game of September of 2004 and sold more than 2 million units by 2007. It was later followed by the 2 direct sequels, which we had discussed a little earlier. I do have some interesting notes. There was a game. So this was during my kind of dig on the facts about Fable. There was a game called Fable that came out 8 years prior to this in 96 or 97, something like that. It was developed by Symbiosis Interactive, and it was only available on MS-DOS and Windows. And it was a point-and-click adventure that seemed similar in the way that it was written, but I did some digging to try and see if there was any kind of correlation or if Peter Molyneux and his team happened to have found some inspiration from it or something, but I couldn't find any ties between the two. And the other little tidbit that I found was that this game actually started out being developed as a Dreamcast title before the Dreamcast was discontinued. Yeah, that was a fun little nugget I found.
Yeah, because I mean, that would have made this a really different game if it had been on there.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I can kind of visualize it, maybe not being rendered as well, because the Xbox was a pretty potent system when it released. I can see this game being on the Dreamcast in some capacity, maybe more instanced areas or something like that to make it work. But imagine what it would have done for the Dreamcast, or maybe it would have flopped. Who knows?
I think it probably would have flopped because I think the big thing with the Dreamcast was its marketing and launch strategy, not so much the quality of the games. And I also think that there might have been a price issue of it being like just insanely, stupidly expensive, but I could just be dumb. That's been known to be a thing. I think, and this is going to sound really weird because I've never played a Dreamcast, but I would like to think, or I get the feeling that this game would be a lot less charming if it was on Dreamcast and didn't have some of the love that kind of Microsoft gave Lionhead.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Dreamcast had its fair share of games that had charm and whimsy, and many cult classics came out of the Dreamcast, but it is hard to say. I mean, the Xbox and Dreamcast are two very different platforms, both in architecture and in the game's executions when they're all released. So I would have been curious. I do think if Dreamcast would have done Fable any justice, it would have been in frame rate. So I'm fairly certain that most of Dreamcast games ran really smooth 30 frames a second. I don't think it runs quite like that on the Xbox.
I don't remember because, I mean, I played it around when it came out. I mean, most recently, like I said, I was playing Fable Anniversary on my Xbox One. Naturally, no frame rate issues there. But also, back then, I didn't know that frame rates were a thing or how to detect them, you know, and now we're old and streaming's a thing. And that is just part of our dialogue these days that I can understand why we would notice it now versus not then.
I certainly never paid attention too much to frame rates when I was younger. The only thing I could have clearly have told you doesn't run smoothly was like Star Fox. I mean, that was, I think, 8 frames. It was so slow.
Hold on, the first one or 64?
The first one, sorry.
Okay, yeah, that's a given.
That was clearly, you could tell this system was chugging to make that work. But between like the N64 era up to, I mean, even some GameCube, PS2 titles, I didn't know any different. You couldn't have asked me what the native frame rate was supposed to be for these games and me give you an honest answer. So tell me a little bit about your history with the game. Let me know where you started with this.
A friend of mine had this, and I saw him playing it, and I was intrigued. Now, I had an Xbox. Xbox I was against getting for a really long time, just because I didn't like big Microsoft coming into my gaming world, and I wanted to see the Xbox fail. But this is right around the time I graduated high school, so I had a little bit of extra cash, and I just picked up an Xbox and, naturally, Halo. Watching my friend play this, I went from not wanting to like it to absolutely loving it. I went out and I bought the Lost Chapters version. I don't have memories of actually playing it because I just played it the once. But when I did, that thing like took over my life for like a solid 3 months where I'm just doing side quests and trying to play the game as authentically to how I would play in real life. And that's always something, you know, in games like this, I try to do instead of going pure good or pure evil, which that was a new concept that was just being introduced to me in this game or in my world of gaming. The world just sucked me in, but the humor is what definitely kept me around.
Just to piggyback off of that, so for those who have never played Fable or don't know what Cody's referring to, Fable has a morality system. So by doing things that would be considered good in the public eye, your character gains positive notoriety points and becomes a good character. And the opposite side of that is if he does things that would be frowned upon or illegal, that earns him these negative notoriety points and makes his character evil as well. So if you haven't played Fable, this is also similar to the mechanic that they have in Infamous, if you're familiar with that. And Lionhead was really big on doing kind of morality systems. So before I'd even played Fable or knew about Fable or anything like that, I actually played both Black and White 1 and 2, which were both produced by Lionhead as well, or developed by Lionhead as well. And they both had morality systems as well. Those were like God Sim games where you managed this village, and in each game you had a creature that basically represented you as the god. And as you did good things, your animal creature would look more kind and loving and nurturing. And as you did more evil things like sacrifice people and things like that, it got more gritty and evil looking.
Yeah, and I remember that. And I can also, or I never played Black and White, but I remember that from obviously Fable, because you just described one of the quests exactly that happens later in the game. To give you guys like a legitimate example from the game, when you first started up and you're in the tutorial area of Oakvale, you are asked by a woman if you have seen her husband, and you naturally go look for him, and you find him, and it turns out that he's cheating on his wife with someone locally in the town. He begs you not to tell her. So if you don't tell the wife and you agree to that, you basically get negative karma. That's an evil thing or a bad thing that you have done. Or you can go tell the wife what you discovered, and then she will promptly run and yell at his ass for as long as you're willing to stand there. And you get good energy, or you did the good thing. So that's actually an example that I saw when I was playing just the other day.
Yeah, my history with this game is very similar to yours. So at least as far as the Xbox hatred goes, this was back when I was young and very loyal to companies. I felt very odd about Microsoft entering into the console game. Now being an adult and understanding that that was a very smart move on their part, outside of the fact that they also have created a lot of good competition in the industry, I feel much better about it and have obviously owned Xboxes since. Back then, I was very resistant to owning an Xbox, and that was before I saw this trailer. I believe it was an E3 of 2003, maybe, when I was watching and I saw this come out. I'm like, that looks like an amazing game. I was sad because it was Xbox only, and I'm like, darn, how am I going to make this work? I don't want an Xbox, but I want this game. I ended up justifying it somehow and bought an Xbox and bought Fable when it launched. And I have never looked back since. I occasionally chat with the ex-developers of Lionhead, who are now making a game called Kinseed, which I backed on Kickstarter. They are wonderful people, and I tell them every time I get a chance to how much Fable has impacted me in such a positive way because of how much time I spent. The only thing I tell them I wish for more is that there was just a way to live inside of the world of Albion. I mean, it really is just a marvelous game. My buddy and I both picked it up around the same time, and we would play it and just share our experiences, what we did differently, what we did the same, how we built our characters, because there's quite a bit of character customization as far as like your skills go and how you can approach building your character out. There was just a lot of good memories and positive energy that went into this game that just came back out tenfold when I played it. Yeah,
I love this game just in general, and I only played through it the once. It's probably kind of like you said, you eventually run out of stuff to do. It's not like Skyrim where you can just boot it up and there's always some stupid fetch quest to do. And you're right. I do wish the Fable games were kind of more like that, or at least had that option. Maybe with a new one. There is another one that has been announced. Probably won't see it for 4 years, maybe. But whenever that trailer dropped, I was like, oh, thank God we're getting Fable again. Yeah. But no, you're right. It's a great game. And honestly, do you remember the experience system in this?
I do. Yes.
I thought the way that they handled experience in this game was so unique. Because for those who don't know, you get like overall experience that you can spend on anything. But then you have your magic. The more you use magic, the more magic experience you get. If you're powering up a magic spell in your, I guess it's a skill tree, but not really, in your skills and your experience menu, it will pull from the magic first and use it, and then jump over and use your general experience. And I thought that was just a really well thought out system.
Yeah, they had a very cool multiplier system that went with that too. So the game felt far less grindy than it could have been. So if everything had been kind of as it was, it would have taken you ages to get yourself maxed out in whatever class you wanted to be, so to speak. But as you remained in combat and didn't get hit, your multiplier would increase, which effectively multiplied how much experience you were earning at the same time. You could get some pretty wicked combos and have just pools of this experience. It just felt very rewarding and very satisfying to go through. And kind of even going back to what you were saying about how this isn't some game you can just boot up. Like once you're done with your quests, you're done. I wonder sometimes, is that what makes it so charming and so endearing and such a great game, is that it is finite. There is a clear end to it. Would it be as loved and adored by all of us if it was a Skyrim style where you can go around and find endless caves and things to go through?
I don't know. You bring up a really good point, actually, because I mean, I'm sure that has to play into it. That and obviously the nostalgia of it, I would say, too, because I mean, I did everything that there was to do in Skyrim. I never want to touch that game again, let alone play it on Alexa or whatever the hell they put it out on next. You might be onto something with that.
Yeah. Although I will admit the Alexa version of Skyrim is pretty damn cool.
I'm judging you.
I dabbled a little bit. Whenever I saw, what was his name? Like Keegan Michael Key or whatever, saying like he wants to eat all the wheels of cheese on that commercial. I was like, this is wild. I didn't even know this thing existed, but they did a pretty good job. I thought it was pretty cool. So
they were just steering into the meme at that point.
Yeah, exactly. I digress. Let's talk about the music. I love this soundtrack. I think that it was a masterpiece as far as what it was used for. I know that you're going to mention the composers in some of your tracks, and I didn't know the specific person, and we'll get into that a little bit more as we go into your tracks, but I didn't know who that person was or what they've touched in the past until I kind of Googled them, and I was like, oh my gosh, this person is a big deal. So I thought that this soundtrack was great, and I'm curious to kind of jump into it here. So why don't you kick us off and tell us your number 5?
All right. And I'm going to go ahead and say it. You are going to hate my bottom 3. And I know that, and I accept that. But they're on my list nonetheless. My number 5 is Arena. I have never heard a song Want Me Murdered more in my life. There is very little levity to this track. And what I mean by that is that in an arena, I would assume to hear more of the back and forth between the high and low notes to indicate that a battle is actually happening. Because there isn't a whole lot of that, this just becomes a straight death track. Then, as the track continues, it does slow down, and the violin does a great job at building suspense and tension. It makes me feel like I'm cowering behind a rock during a big battle that I'm clearly not going to win. It's not amazing, but it invokes such emotion from me in a way that rarely happens.
So you were right.
Yeah, I know. I knew it whenever I was doing my list. I was like, Peter's going to hate these, but suck it.
So I don't hate it, but it didn't make my list, obviously. It was just one of those tracks where I was like, I understand, and I've heard it plenty of times. There's a whole set of quests that deal with fighting in the arena. So I heard it enough to know what it was even before I re-listened to it. Just not for me. Your memories of fighting the giant golems kind of echo my own. Aside from the bone rendering giants, this song is solid. I will not take that away from it. I absolutely love all of the deep horns mixed with the drums. It make it feel very much like a battle cry. I was like, when I heard this song, all I thought in my head was, grab your sword, knave, for tonight we fight to the death.
And that's basically what it is. And full transparency, because I last played this so long ago in depthly, I forgot that the arena was in the game. I don't remember that at all. And I don't know why, because I know, like, you're telling me that, there's quest line stories, and that kind of stuff that you can do. And I know I would have just grinded through that thing, but I don't have any memory of it.
Yeah, I don't remember if it was a mainline quest or if it was optional. And ironically, when I first listened to it again, I actually had mixed it up at first because I thought it was the fighting pits, which are I forget what they're called now, the fighting brothers or something like that, the battle brothers. Those guys that fight, they make you take your weapons off, they make you take your shirt off, and you fight fist to fist with a squad of people. They start off in Bowerstone, and then they kind of move all over the place through the actual world of Albion. And then I remembered that there was an actual arena, and that's where this took place. So my details are a little fuzzy as far as if it was an optional or if it was a mandatory quest to go through. But I do remember the arena, the actual being in the arena and fighting in it quite well. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that piece of the game quite a bit.
Yeah, well, at least you remembered it, because I did not. All right, bud, what you got for number 5?
My number 5 is Bowerstone. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm fairly certain that this is the first time I put a song on my list that's in 3/4 time, which is hysterical to me because actually quite a few songs keep this time signature. I think all of that relates to the fact that this is one of those games where the main song is used several times, just changed for different areas. Mm-hmm. So the same song that you hear in Oakvale is used in Bowerstone. It's used in Hook Coast. Yes, yeah, that's Hook Coast. But they change it to fit the area a little bit. Ultimately, it's the same song. Bowerstone in particular is, I put this on my list because Fable is typically plagued by a notoriously long tutorial. And then it's followed by some really early game stuff that doesn't seem to showcase all that much about the game. It's kind of just leading the player along and teaching you about what you can and can't do. Bowerstone kind of changes all of that. All of a sudden, the gears switch. You're told that this is where your adventure kind of starts, and you're pretty much set free at that point. You are given quests to do, but you don't necessarily have to follow them until you're ready to. You look out into Bowerstone and you see all kinds of shops everywhere. Yep, you can steal from those shops. You see all these houses? Sure, you can break in and sleep in their beds if you want. What about those chickens? Yes, you can kick the chickens. I know I mentioned that earlier, but I put a little side note and said that the Hound from Game of Thrones would be very disappointed that you cannot eat all of the chickens. From buying houses to interacting with everyone however you'd like, whether that's talking to them or punching them in the face, Bowerstone really kicks off the adventure for me, and the music provokes so much excitement that it just makes me feel very much like, oh, the possibilities. Bowerstone seems to be more well off than the other locations, and the song tries to reflect that. And by well off, I mean wealthy.
Here's a confession of my own. When I was doing my first pass of this, I thought the soundtrack we were listening to, I thought this track was wrong because this doesn't sound like Bowerstone to me. I don't remember the Bowerstone music at all from when I played it back in the day, but Bowerstone is a hub. If I'm not mistaken, it's like one of the biggest cities, if not the biggest, in the game. And you go in, you buy shops or you buy houses, you can shop, you can get married, you can live there, you can do whatever you want in this town. There was something about this track that, for being the Bowerstone track, it just didn't connect for me. Now, granted, the other day I went back and I played it, I got to Bowerstone and I'm like, I'll be damned. It is this track. And I was completely wrong on my first assumption. But no, I didn't identify this as being Bowerstone. I thought for sure that someone had made a mistake.
Wow, I'm not sure. Whenever I was going through the list and everything, it's one of the few songs that I was able to identify just by hearing it and within a few notes. But I've started Fable quite a few times at this point, so maybe that has a lot to do with it.
Yeah, it probably does to a degree because I haven't really played it all that much throughout my life. Something that you brought up was a notoriously lengthy tutorial. It's not as long as you remember, I don't think.
I mean, I just started a file not too long ago, and it still felt fairly long to me. The points that I'm referring to are from the time you are a child doing your little kid quests, even through the guild, which I all consider tutorial as well. All of that piece to me seems long. Like I said, the game doesn't really open up and allow you to leave the guild hall. I think it's probably close to in-game time, almost an hour, which is incredibly long.
Okay, I agree and I disagree because I was going to say it's about an hour, but it also depends on how do you want to play it. Because, yeah, you can go train with your sword and then you can just run around and explore. which is something that when I did it most recently, I didn't do. So part of that is optional, because if you just run it straight and you don't do any exploration around the guild or anything like that, it's not as long as what I think people would expect it or would be their first impression of the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that's a fair assessment. One of the things you mentioned and I did not point out is that, especially in the guild, you have to go through all 3 tutorials to teach you about strength, skill, and will, but you can do them all again and get a bonus item to go with it. So you get an upgraded sword if you can complete the task faster than anybody else or without getting hit or, something like that. So when I say a long tutorial, this is coming from somebody who does do everything. I did all the side quests. I did all of the tutorial things the second time so that I could get the extra weapons and so forth. So you're right. That does include all of the content that you can actually experience.
Yeah, because there is a lot to do. Even when you go and you look at bookcases and you find a beard, you can't have a beard yet. You're still a child. It doesn't make sense yet, but that item carries over. So there's a ton to do and to explore, but it's shortened down quite a bit if you are just running through it, because my goal was to try and experience as much of the soundtrack as I could. Sure. I was just rushing through this thing.
Right. Makes sense. All right. Let's hear number 4.
Another track that you will hate. This is Chapel of Evil. This is a haunting track. It doesn't sound like you are in a chapel to me at all. When I hear this track, I'm taken to a bayou for some reason. One of the reasons I really like this track is the light use of the percussion in the background in the didgeridoo. Honestly, I can't believe that we have a didgeridoo in a video game soundtrack. The vocals that play throughout this track I find to be bewitching in that listening to them is almost zen-like and oddly relaxing to me. This track leaves me in an almost meditative state after listening to it for as long as I have. It has a very unique sound to it, so that's why I appreciate it, but I know it's not going anywhere near your list at all.
Again, very true.
Yeah.
I have to preface that all of these tracks are great. There's not a single one that I listened to that I heard and I was like, that's definitely not making the list. It was just more whenever it comes down to my preference, this definitely does not fall in it. But my first thought whenever I heard the song was, knock, knock, bitch, Daddy Scorm is here to play. It starts off with like these knocking noises and it's really interesting. But for those who don't know or haven't played, when you go into the Temple of Scorm, you see a lot of these like hooded figures and people there, and the whole room is lit up red. So it makes you very aware that this is not a good place to be. And when you speak to somebody, they say, would you like to make a sacrifice to this god of death, basically? When you hear that, you're like, oh, a sacrifice. Well, what do you mean? They mean people. You can take people here and sacrifice them, which is insane. Needless to say, it drops your karma considerably to do so. But there is no questions about what you need to do when you arrive. You get here and you know exactly what you're in for. This music just kind of fits right in with that.
Yeah, it's really dark and I like it. Maybe it's just because it is the spooky season and that kind of thing, why my bottom three are all more horror than my number one and my number two. But yeah, I just really enjoyed the journey that this track kind of took me on just listening to it outside of the game. And that's, I do put it into context when I do hear it in the game and what I do remember and what I don't. But just listening to this track, no context, just the track itself, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I mean, the use of all the different instruments to kind of pull it all together, and specifically the didgeridoo, as you said, it really does create such a nice melodic hum that is almost like meditative, right? You can listen to this anywhere and calm down if you didn't know what it was there for.
You're absolutely right. It's oddly relaxing when it shouldn't be, quite frankly. What about your next pick?
Number 4 for me is the Guild song. When I first heard this song, I thought it was very much out of place because it sounds like it belongs in a church, right? But then it kind of all clicked to me. Church equals safety. Safety would be like a sanctuary. And then it was like, oh, right. The guild is meant to be a sanctuary for your character, starting from very early in the game all the way through to the very end, minus one little spoilery bit, which I won't get into. The story behind the game is that your parents and really your whole village is raided by a bunch of people, and you lose everybody that you love as far as you know. Your mom, your dad, your sister, gone. And it's one of the guys from this guild that picks you up and says, look, there's time for tears. Now is not that time. We need to get you into shape so we can take out this main guy who did this all to you, get you to avenge your family, avenge your village, and everything like that. What really captivates me about this song is that if you listen carefully, the voices are actually singing the Fable theme song, which I thought was such a nice touch because it's spaced out enough. It sounds like a church choir that's singing this. If you pushed it together and got rid of some of the gaps in the vocals, then you would hear that song I was telling you about, that Oakvale theme song, but just done in like a churchly way. It is subtle, but once you get it, you get it.
I just have one note for this, and our longtime listeners will remember this from back on episode 1. And all I had to put down was, Hymn of Faith, is that you? Because that really, it's really similar to, that was my first impression. And I was kind of scarred from doing our first episode, Final Fantasy, where I had to listen to that track so many times where at the start of it, I loved it. And then I grew to resent it. This is not that track because this is the only time it shows up, but it does. That experience left a bad taste in my mouth. So as a standalone track, I don't enjoy this track as much. It's 100% vocals, right? There's no music to this. Am I wrong?
Right. So when the vocals are in there, I think there's a light bit of music behind the vocals, but it's between that, nothing. It's dead silent.
Okay. And that's what I thought, because I thought in the track by itself, the bits of vocals that they were a bit too spaced out. I was like, is the song over? Nope. We're still going.
Yeah.
Nope. We're still going. And eventually the track actually did end. And I was like, all right, well, now let me pause this thing and put my one note down. But no, this is what you hear when you are in the guild. So you hear it quite a bit, but it's nothing that necessarily resonated with me as a track at all.
The fact that you mentioned that it's Hymn of the Faith it says a lot about it, because that was one of the first things I thought, and arguably might have been why I even put it on here, is because it did give me strong Final Fantasy X vibes. But yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. It does really echo that kind of structure and the way that it is. Yeah, I agree 100%. Let's move on to your number 3.
This is where I think I might be winning you back a little bit, just a tiny bit. Number 3 for me is Witchwood. This has Danny Elfman written all over it. This is his style to a T. It's dark most of the time and lighter when it needs to be. The whimsical and spooky nature of this track really makes it for me. It reminds me of The Nightmare Before Christmas in a big way. Witchwood never feels dark for the sake of being dark like Arena does. Almost like you are walking through the woods and expecting an enemy to jump out from behind a tree or something. Overall, this track flows quite well from start to finish.
Hello, Oakvale, my old friend. It's so nice to see you all ferried out.
Yeah, that's basically it.
This one definitely has more of the fairy whimsical flavor to it. I don't recall Witchwood off the top of my head. I vaguely remember it, but I never got around to. So what I tried to do for these were to look up a playthrough and find out what the area was, just to refresh. Because usually if I see something, then I'm like, oh yeah, that's right, I remember that area. But I never got around to getting to this one. I don't recall it too much, but I feel the Nightmare Before Christmas vibes hardcore. It's not my favorite rendition of the Oakvale theme by any stretch, but it is very charming and very whimsical nonetheless.
Yeah, that's really kind of what does it for me. Again, we're talking about this is an autumn game. Nothing really says it more to me than this track in particular. Overall, I just really, really enjoy it. All right, man. What is your number 3?
So my number 3 is The Hook Coast. When I read through your notes, I laughed at one of your comments that said I would have one of your songs on my list, but somewhere lower. You were right about the placement. You said about 3 or 4, but you're wrong about the song, because this is a better version of your song, and I'm sticking to it. I don't want to give away the title of your song because it does come higher on your list, and I want to keep that a surprise, but it is a bit unfair because technically Hook Coast came out as one of the expansion locations that came with the Lost Chapters. It's not technically OG Fable, but to me, it is a more fleshed out, mature version of the song that you end up picking. When I think of yours, I think of a little boy chicken chaser Arseface. Okay. With mine, I think of the mature adult gladiator.
This is absolutely a better pick than mine. This is a better song than mine, but obviously you read my notes and mine is where it is for obvious reasons. But no, this is basically my pick, but just with much better vocals. You're right. That does kind of make it feel more adult. And also it takes place later game, where mine is most associated right when you start the game up. You know what I mean? So we're used to hearing that and seeing that more because, like we've said with some of our other games, we just don't remember it because we never got that far. How many times have you booted up Fable versus how many times did you beat it? No matter what, you always heard my track. But your track is definitely the better of the two, and it almost made my list.
Yeah, I mean, it's a solid one for sure. And I agree with you 100% as far as booting up Fable versus beating Fable. So I've probably started that game countless times, but beaten it probably only a handful, maybe 3 or 4 times. So
I think I only beat the game the once. At most, I beat it 3 times. Once to play the way I wanted to, and then go purely good and then purely evil. I could see myself doing that because that's a very me thing to do. But yeah, versus the amount of times I've started it up, my ratio is probably a little bit better than yours, but that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm the same way. I do usually a pure good run, pure evil run, both in my style of play as far as combat goes. Then I try and dabble with, I try doing an all skill build and things like that. Let's move on to your number 2.
My number 2 is going to be a shock to absolutely none of you. It is the Fable theme. We all know that I love my main themes, and that is very much true. I love this track. To me, this is the best track on the entire album. Fable is an action RPG where you choose the outcome of the character, and if they are either good or evil, like we were saying. This track starts out with an epic main theme, and then as it continues, the track gets darker, more sinister sounding before turning more regal and positive. This track literally sums up the entire game, and I love it.
I wanted so badly to put this on my list.
Then why didn't you?
There were some that I liked a little better. And when I say that, I mean, it was very, very close. I might have even written it down on the list for a little while and eventually took it off because I do like my numbers 1 and 2 a lot better for what they are. But man, this is a very tight song. I really love it. The other thing is that I had a hard time weeding out my nostalgia for it because I remember when I first saw the trailer at E3, this was the song that they had running for it. And this is what I fell in love to Fable to. When I hear this song, I still get goosebumps. The magic of Fable has never left my body. And it makes me sad and nervous about the future of it and what's going to happen. I'm happy that there's a new one coming out, but I'm nervous about what it might be, given that a lot of the old team isn't going to be there. Most of that has been moved to that new game I mentioned earlier that the old team of Lionhead is building. I wish I had more to say about this song itself, but it literally does speak for itself. I couldn't agree more that if you listen to the song, you know exactly what you're going to be in for. So if somebody were to sit me down blind, I've never played this game in my life, and we're like, here's this theme song, tell me what you think this game is going to be, I would probably describe Fable in a nutshell, maybe without some of the more nuanced stuff, but more or less what it's going to be, I can probably nail it just from this song.
Yes, and it is worth pointing out that as far as I know, this is the only track that Danny Elfman worked on himself.
That was what my notes had mentioned, but I do know that I don't remember if he credits himself for it or if it's actually in the physical credits. I haven't beaten the game in a while, so I'd have to go back and look, but I think he's got his name on quite a few other ones. Everywhere I've read so far has said that this is his. He wrote and composed this himself from the ground up.
Yeah, and dear God, you can tell, because, I mean, this is a little bit about me that I don't even think you know. I love movie soundtracks. I have multiple film soundtracks sitting right over there in my closet. So I definitely knew who Danny Elfman was. I knew him from the Spider-Man movies, from Coraline, Nightmare Before Christmas, as we stated, obviously. So whenever I pulled up the document and I actually saw that he actually did this soundtrack or had a influence on it, I was so excited to get into this. All right, man. Tell me about your number 2.
My number 2 is the Greatwood theme song. I absolutely adore the build-up in this song. You had mentioned in Persona 5 how you hated how the one track I had builds up and then just kind of left you with nothing. This song is absolutely not that. Every 4 measures or so, the song changes and evolves and becomes something more complex and utilizes a multitude of different instruments that kind of culminate into this gorgeous sounding masterpiece. I fought long and hard between this and my number 1 and which one would actually sit at that spot. It was really close. It took me like a good 20 minutes to finally decide. My feelings on the song are hilarious to me, though, because despite its beauty and grace, Greatwood is riddled with all kinds of little nasties that are trying to kill you completely. There are bandits in the woods. There are little wasps in the woods that are trying to kill you. And then you have this light and beautiful song that just kind of sits there in its wonderfulness.
Yeah, this is a great pick. And you actually, at least early on in the game, and I guess all throughout, you hear this a lot because Greatwood is a large area that you actually have to kind of get through. One of the notes I had was like, I love the contrast between the lighter and the heavier notes. And I don't know why. And I've been trying for days now. This reminds me of A Link to the Past for some reason. And I can't put my finger on it.
I'll have to re-listen again and hear for myself because I'm curious now. I never made the connection, but I'll have to go back and see.
Yeah, it was kind of like, oh God, I forget the name of the track. And I'm not even sure if it made the list. But just something mentally took me back to that episode where I was like, this could go on A Link to the Past and it wouldn't be too incredibly out of place, I don't think. Granted, it's a giant improvement in terms of an actual score versus what the little carts were able to do. But no, you actually have a really, really good pick here.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was great. And I was actually surprised, just to note real quick, that when I saw it, I remembered it, but I thought it was later in the game. But you actually get access to this area almost as early as everything else. I think it's like 2 areas from when you finally leave the guild. Yeah, it was something you hear early. And like you said, it's a huge area. So you hear a lot of it. Yeah, it's fantastic. All right, sir, we've arrived at the infamous number 1. So let's hear what yours is.
We have already talked about at great length, whether you realize it or not. It is Oakvale. The reason this is my number 1 is simple. When we talked about doing this episode, this is the track that came to my mind. You hear this anytime you're in Oakvale, obviously. When I picked this game up again a few weeks ago, I told Peter that this soundtrack sounds like if Danny Elfman had scored The Lord of the Rings, and not knowing that Danny actually worked on and heavily influenced the score. This is the track I was referencing. This is the track that I remembered. It's just a quaint track to go along with a quaint little town. It's simple and pleasant to listen to. While it's not my favorite track, this is the one track on this album that my mind associates with Fable and more than likely always will. Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned Oakvale now quite a few times, whether it was the fact that this song is really the one that's mixed all throughout the other tracks, or the fact that Oakvale is kind of where all this all begins. But what I really enjoyed about Oakvale itself is kind of the whimsy of it and the fact that it fits what Oakvale is. So we're Bowerstone, and there's one other town that have like these large stone built houses, and you can kind of tell there's a lot of money there. Oakvale is the opposite. There's these smaller houses that are more like almost like huts. The music kind of lines up with how much money would be quote unquote circulating in that town. I did like your comments here. Like I said before, you were almost right. I couldn't in good faith put the song there when there are so many better ones, but I definitely
understand and relate to the fact that this really does kind of set that vision of what Fable will be. I mean, you hear it the moment you turn the game on and start your character, because this is where he begins his journey. But when I hear the song, it does remind me of when you're a kid. The thing that I guess kind of irks me from it, and it has nothing to do with the track itself, but it reminds me of trying to find Rosie for that little girl.
Oh, God.
When in reality, all I wanted to do was punch her in the face. Even when I'm being a good character, I hear her ask me about Rosie, and she's like, "Oh, will you find my Rosie?" And I literally want to send her over to those bullies and let them just beat on her because I can't stand her.
The voice acting and animation does not hold up. I will tell you that right now. It's not great.
Oh, yes. So many cases of scary face, right?
Oh, God. I almost made a note about that specifically just for us to bring up at some point. But, God, the game still plays great. It just doesn't look great anymore.
Yeah, I mean, even with the HD touch-ups on it, it cleaned a lot of it up, but I don't know what it is about those faces they couldn't get right, but everybody looks terrified all the time.
The British way, that's all.
It must be. It must be. I like the area. I like the song, but it associates too many awful memories of the people inside of it. There's just a lot of those interactions that I have with those people, and I don't know why, but just Oakvale rubs me the wrong way. And I have a really big note here that I put in all capital letters because I feel like it's a very important question. But why is my house for sale? I'm alive and it's my house. So why do I have to buy it back?
Oh, yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah,
that's a really good question. The only thing, I don't know, repossession? I don't know. I'm trying to make sense of this because I love the damn game. Shut up, Peter.
it was one of those things. It was the only gripe I had with coming back to Oakvale and seeing that my house was for sale. I'm like, yo, this is my house, bitch. Give me it back.
This is akin to my mind trip with Elevator B, where I went on that big long tangent where it's just, this shouldn't be a thing, or it doesn't make sense, but nevertheless, here it is in this game. Now, you bring good points, but luckily you don't have to think about that for too long because in the next 10 minutes, everyone's dead.
Yeah, right.
And your house is gone. It's burned down. So what does it matter anyway? All right, buddy. What is your number one?
My number one is the Temple of Light. I never spent too much time in either the Temple of Avo or the Chapel of Scorn. But for the former, I wish I had. I have been missing out on this gem for far too long. At least it seemed that way to me. I was playing through the soundtrack and going through the whole thing to see which ones I wanted. And the song came on and I'm like, what is this? I do not remember this in Fable. And that's why, because I not really much of a churchgoer IRL, so I don't do much church in game. This track is hauntingly beautiful, and it does a fantastic job of being a polar opposite of the Chapel of Evil, and as it should. At the same time, though, this song gives me a lot of conflicting feelings. The melody and the ambiance gives it both this beautiful and yet somehow very eerie feeling. It feels very welcoming, but it also feels very judgmental all the same. It feels simple on the surface, but it also kind of notes like a very complex composition. And I like that the most about it. I like that it feels not any one way at any one time.
This, I'll be honest with you, this track to this day confuses me because I don't know how I feel about it. And I don't know why. It's a simple track. Do you like it or do you not? And I can honestly say I don't know. I will say that it's beautiful. I believe it's a keyboard that's making these noises or these sounds. Am I wrong on that?
No, I think you're right. It's very synthesized. The noise itself that is coming out is not a natural instrument by any stretch, but I think it would be like some sort of like synthesized keyboard or piano or something.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that this instrument, whatever it is only used on this track, that I can tell. And that's what makes it stand out as much as it does, because like I was exactly like you. It came on and I was like, what in the world is this? It does when we listen to it. It happens later on in the soundtrack. So we have listened to the bulk of it by this point. So to hear this come on, I was utterly perplexed as to what it was. Like you, I don't really remember it from in the game. So just going off a standalone track, it is gorgeous, but I still don't know how I feel about this yet.
I think that what I was saying before about how it kind of plays back and forth with my emotions and feelings on it, it feels very calming, but it also feels very suspect at the same time. And even when you talk to the people inside of the temple, because it's not like I haven't been in there, I just didn't spend enough time to recognize the song. Everybody kind of has this very shady feel, just like in the Chapel of Evil. You go in and you talk to them and it's almost like you're being judged, especially if you don't donate to them, which I should note that while the Chapel of Scorn will take all of your souls to feed the god, the Temple of Avo will take all of your money to feed God.
What's funny is you were sitting there, you were describing that, and in the back of my head, I was like, I knew that there was a reason why I don't go to church anymore, because you just pretty much kind of summed it up, because that's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah, I feel like this is the two extremes of church IRL. You either pay a bunch of money to win favor with God, or you sacrifice souls to win favor with God or whatever.
And obviously I'm going souls because I have the Chapel of Evil on mine.
So no,
but it's a beautiful track, man.
It is. It's very captivating. And I wish I could put my finger on what that uneasy feeling is. Maybe it is just the idea of it being in a church, or maybe it's the way that it's actually composed. Maybe it was meant to be that way, but I'd love to pick their brain about it and find out why it feels the way it does.
I mean, it obviously wasn't on accident, because, I mean, there's really not such a thing as a bad track on this album at all. So, yeah, this was a well orchestrated track for sure.
Yep, definitely. Knock another one off the list because we are finished with Fable.
Woohoo!
Yeah, this was a good run. I think out of all of our games so far, maybe barring Persona 5, because I do really enjoy that soundtrack a lot. But this is a very close second for a soundtrack that I could listen to from beginning to end and didn't have to like skip any tracks and just go hard. Nope, you're not going on the list at all.
Yeah, I will actually say the same thing. With me, it is different. I would say the only other one would naturally be Donkey Kong Country.
Right. As always, I've got a question prepared, even though it wasn't quite prepared beforehand. Nobody needs to know or hear about the fact that I'm a absolute professional podcaster and had this all ready to go. Our question of the episode is, what was your preference when building a character? Did you go might, which was basically the melee people, skill, which was your bow and dexterity, or will, which was your magic using?
I was might 100%. And I also hated using will. hated using magic. I just couldn't control it. And I've said before, like, I like being a tank, just running in, beating down everything that's in front of me. Prime example right here. That's where the majority of my stats and my experience would go. Now, the experience system that we talked about earlier did make me want to use skill and will more than I would have normally, just because I like the leveling system in that. But no, man, I was might all the way. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, this is a good case in point. So I know you had talked about it and you thought I was more of like a magic guy. And I told you that I was sword and board, very much like you are. And this was a good example of that. I did might on pretty much every single one of my builds. I guess if I'm being fair, I probably was a little more well-rounded, with magic being kind of the lighter end of everything. I liked some of the skills that skill gave you, which was being able to swing your weapon faster. I was definitely a might build. In later playthroughs, I did do a full skill run where the only thing I put into might was giving me more health, I think, and maybe more defense, but everything else I put into skill. And I will admit I had a lot more fun with it. There is a thing that they programmed in the game, and I'm not sure if you knew this or not, but if you score a critical hit on somebody's head with an arrow, their body falls down and the head stays in the air, being supported by a spurt of blood that just kind of lets it hover there. Have you ever seen that?
No, but I know what I'm YouTubing in about 20 minutes.
Yeah, it was wild. The first time I scored a crit and saw somebody's head sitting there, I'm like, that's morbid and so much fun. I'm going to do it again.
No, I didn't know that at all. And I did the other day when I was playing, I did use my bow more because it was more powerful than the sword I had at the time. And also, it was one of those weird escort missions with a werewolf and things that really just goes on for too long. So I did use it a bit more the most recent time that I played it. But I may have to boot it back up because I was dabbling or debating if I was going to continue playing now that this episode's over. And I might actually continue playing this thing.
You should. It's definitely worth it, but I'm going to shame you for calling them werewolves when they were Balverines.
Shut up.
You'd hate me for that.
Yes. Well, on the long list of reasons why I hate you, that is now penciled in at number like 382.
Right. Corrected me on Wolverines to Balverines. Got it. It is worthwhile. I also started a playthrough before this episode, and I will be continuing it myself. That's it for us. We are at the end of the episode. Cody, as always, man, thank you so much for being here and dealing with my corrections as I harass you about not knowing the names of your characters, and just for being here in general. It's always a blast, man.
No, it really is. And this is something this was a really fun episode and one that I was really looking forward to. So, no, it's my pleasure.
Yeah, it was a great listen for sure. Thanks, everybody, for always listening. You guys are wonderful and help keep the podcast going with all of your support. So I appreciate that. Make sure you guys do the whole like, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And if you're feeling willing, give us a review. We'd love to hear feedback and know what we can be doing better. If you'd like to see some added structure to what we've been doing, we've been covering this formula now for 9 episodes. It's been the same way, and we like it and everything like that. But if you don't, or there's something that you want to hear differently or how we approach it, by all means, let us know, because we'd love to hear. I almost forgot to mention, but if you want to answer the question of the episode, you can also do that at Deep Base Podcasts on Twitter. It's the fastest way to reach out to us, and we'll have a nice little conversation on what path you took. And if you chose we'll shame you for it.
Yes, extremely.
Or maybe we'll be envious. I don't know, because nobody can control the lightning.
Hold on. What are the odds that Ashley is Will?
I don't think she is, but I will be very curious to hear if she is.
I was about to say, if she is, that's the most on-brand thing for this show.
All right, guys, that's it for us. We'll see you in 2 weeks for a slightly special Halloween episode. So we'll see you guys then. Have a good one.
I'm excited, guys. Bye.